From there being only 3 rules inside the octagon, to an entire rulebook being made, published, and distributed, to say things have changed since 1993 would be an understatement. The UFC is constantly adding and amending existing rules. The latest one would be penalizing fighters for grabbing the fence. Technically, grabbing the fence isn't a recent rule change. If anything, it's existed for over a decade at this point. However, when you think of the UFC being promoted as essentially a no rules inside the octagon promotion, you wouldn't really think grabbing the fence would be that big of a deal. And
the undisputed UFC.
She is caught. I mean, that is a dejected.
For a while now, that's exactly how it was dealt with. If a fighter grabbed the fence during a matchup, the referee would take note and tell them not to do it again. And that was virtually the extent of it. Points weren't deducted for it, but the fighter would be told off for it. Then, in 2006, the rule came into focus during UFC 57. That's where Chuck Liddell and Randy Couture met for their third and final matchup. Couture had a pre-fight record of 14-7 and had been an established heavyweight fighter before moving into the light heavyweight division. By all accounts, Couture was the favorite to win. Even though Liddell had won their second matchup, there was quite a bit of controversy surrounding his win.
That's exactly why you don't see a lot of guys shoot that shot, because it's pretty easy to counter. You shoot it from a long...
People believed that Liddell had poked Couture in the eye and thrown him off balance. Now his win evened the score, and the third bout was the decider. But it only ended up sparking a debate on fence grabbing. So with everything on the line, the two fighters met for a third and final time in 2006 to settle the score. Liddell would end up winning, but not without sparking a debate on the UFC's quietest foul. Fans questioned the Iceman's win after he was verbally called out for grabbing the fence twice during the matchup.
And 1/2. 203.5 for the Iceman.
Combinations, uppercuts, shoulders in the head.
One fan went as far as suggesting that grabbing the fence was what got Liddell the victory. The fan claimed that taking away Couture's momentum was what Liddell had going on for him, which is why he did it twice before eventually taking Couture off guard and winning the fight via TKO. Randy announced his retirement from MMA shortly after the match. It's been almost 2 decades since the fact. And granted the matchup in itself was historic for other reasons, it broke pay-per-view records for the UFC at the time. It was widely regarded as the bout that reintroduced MMA to the US population.
Flyweight division, Bruno Silva takes on 15th ranked Tyson Nam.
Right now.
And I know what you're thinking. Why am I talking about a matchup from 2006 now? I mean, the real question should have been, why didn't anyone talk about illegal fence grabbing more? There might be a few reasons for it. The first one is the most obvious one. It goes against the branding image the UFC's set for itself. Imagine a matchup being interrupted midway, with both fighters being called back to the middle because of a fence grab. So you'd have to break up a pretty intense bout just because one guy held on to the fence.
People like to push the buttons and talk about fighter pay, and you don't ever see us.
And of all the superlatives.
I know, that doesn't sound like something you'd expect from a hard-hitting, brutal sport like MMA, but the rule exists, and it exists for a good cause. It gives fighters an unfair advantage in what should otherwise be a test of their offense and defense. The UFC's seen some major rule changes in the past few years. Most of them were introduced in 2017, like a more clear description of eye gouging, but fence grabbing hasn't been talked about much since, and I think it should. So, here are the pros of penalizing fighters for fence grabbing.
Israel, the last style bender.
Taking some leg damage, these boys.
Yeah, Gaethje with some. Oh, he got him with a roll.
The UFC follows a 10-point must system. This means that fighters gain 10 points for winning a round. The other fighter would have 9 or fewer points based on various criterion. This means that a single point can determine the outcome of a match. But as we've seen, referees and judges aren't too keen on deducting points unless something's very clearly over the line, and they don't think fence grabbing is enough of a crime to be penalized for. But here's why I think that's wrong.
Gregor, the first man ever to hold 2 titles simultaneously.
Connor relaxed and smiling.
A Reddit user pointed out that in Schaub vs. Madsen, Brendan Schaub grabbed the fence a total of 11 times during their bout. He even grabbed hold of John Madsen's trousers about 3 times too. Schaub did this to avoid a takedown or to improve his position. The user pointed out that he was called out for the action every single time. So that means that the ref not only saw it happen, but called him out for it too all 11 times. And when Roy Nelson asked Schaub about grabbing the fence, all he did was roll his eyes at him. The Reddit thread went on to talk about how Schaub grabbing the fence was premeditated. He knew that he wouldn't be penalized for it because the UFC is pretty relaxed when it comes to it. Schaub ended up winning the bout. To play devil's advocate though, he might have won because he was the superior fighter, but you can't discredit the fact that he broke one of the UFC's few rules to get that win.
Ask the UFC. I don't know, man. It's the layout of the heavyweight division. And
As I said, a single point deduction can alter the results of the match pretty significantly. Some users suggested that another way to penalize a fighter who'd grabbed a hold of the fence to avoid a takedown would be to stop the match then and there, and then have both fighters back in the middle with the one who grabbed the fence losing position to the guy who followed the rules. Hit him where it hurts, basically. But then again, the UFC has its reasons for not making a bigger deal out of fence grabbing. So let's talk about the cons now. The only 3 rules that existed back in 1993 when the UFC held its first US bout were no biting, no groin kicks, and no eye gouging. Of course, the lattermost of the 3 has seen some controversy over the years, but those were basically it. The event in Denver saw 8 men of all sizes compete in a no-barred match for the title, and while the whole promotion wasn't without its fair share of controversy, it also saw a spike in interest in what some people called human cockfighting. Because, let's be real, the UFC's built a reputation for itself being a fight without any rules. Some would be necessary, like in 1993, you were allowed to repeatedly kick someone in the head even when they were lying on the ground.
Said second to none. Oh! He front kicked him in the face!
Enough for their teeth to get knocked out and flown toward the announcer's table. Yup, that happened. So a rule change, and a pretty strict one, was necessary. Would one for grabbing the fence really be that necessary? Only con I can see here is a pretty big one. People will lose interest in a promotion where they feel like fighters can be penalized for something that isn't advertently connected to the matchup. Talking about the same Reddit thread I just mentioned, some users pointed out that grabbing the fence has rarely ever given fighters a significant advantage in the bout. Sure, it's happened, but it's not necessarily something that'll happen every time. So why make a big deal of it, right? I guess the jury's still out on that one.
The fight clock is brought to you by Modelo.
In the meantime, the UFC might consider changing its judging criteria at least. The 10-point must system is the UFC's take on boxing's established judging system. However, unlike their system, the judges in the promotion don't have an open scoring system. This means that fighters aren't sure what'll help them gain points and what deducts a few in the matchup until after it's over. An open scoring system might even inadvertently help in quietly establishing the fence grabbing penalty without any boos from the crowd. Hey, it's an idea. And that's all on the pros and cons of illegal fence grabbing.
It's like the Paddy Pimblett fight. It's like Gordon had a horrible game plan going into that 3rd round.